Storm clouds churned over Seattle, like a warning the world had chosen to ignore. High above the city, where ambition usually landed in polished silence, the executive helipad atop Sterling Tower trembled beneath a dying machine. Emergency lights bled red across rain-slick concrete as an $80 million Aurora X helicopter shuddered mid-landing, its turbine whining like something alive and in pain. Inside the cockpit, CEO Adelaide Monroe felt the vibration before she understood it. The rotor pitch was wrong. Not the ordinary buffeting of November winds, not the harmless protest of metal cutting through heavy air. This was deeper, a crawling tremor that traveled up through the seat into her spine, like a warning whispered directly into bone. The helicopter touched down hard. Outside, lightning fractured the sky. The turbine began to die. Adelaide shoved open the side hatch and stormed onto the pad into fuel-laced rain. "Fix this, and I'll pay you $100 million. Her voice cut through wind and rotor wash, sharp with the kind of authority that moved markets and buried competition. But she wasn't shouting at engineers. She was shouting at the janitor crouched beside the landing skid. He didn't answer. The engineers froze under flashing lightning, unsure if she was serious or if the stress had finally cracked something inside her perfectly calculated executive mind. Elias Grant removed his soaked gloves slowly. Scar-lined hands emerged beneath the stormlight. Steady, practiced hands that did not belong to a man who replaced hallway light bulbs and mopped hydraulic fluid from hangar floors. In seconds, he traced the source. A clog pressure valve. No, installed backward. He reached into the open panel, ignoring the hiss of fuel vapor and the storm pounding against his coveralls. One adjustment, a governor override. The turbine roared back to life. The Aurora X breathed again, because the janitor had once built engines like this. And suddenly every person on that helipad was asking the same silent question. What made a maintenance worker know more about jet turbines than an entire engineering crew? Seattle's Sterling Tower pierced the November sky like a steel needle threading storm clouds, 80 floors above ground. Power usually arrived in silence, executives stepping out of aircraft that represented contracts, alliances, or wars nobody talked about in public briefings. Tonight, power had nearly turned into catastrophe. Elias pushed his maintenance cart across the concrete, rainwater pooling in its rusted wheels. He moved the way he always moved, quietly, precisely, hands brushing tie-down anchors and fuel drains with familiarity that bordered on instinct. 36 years old, lean, invisible, his Navy coveralls bore the Sterling Aerotech logo. His name patch simply read, Maintenance. Nobody asked his first name. Nobody cared. He was the man who cleaned what executives spilled, the one who replaced bulkhead lights while billion-dollar decisions happened 40 floors below. What they didn't know could fill the fuselage of the Aurora X prototype behind him. What they didn't ask could save their lives. Adelaide Monroe had built Sterling Aerotech into something the Pentagon couldn't ignore. At 34, she had turned a regional aviation supplier into a defense contractor competing for a $3.2 billion government deal. She didn't do second place. She didn't do excuses. And she certainly didn't do janitors who thought they knew better than certified engineers. Tonight, Aurora X had to fly. The Pentagon's evaluation team would arrive in 17 hours. The helicopter needed to prove it could perform in hostile weather, deliver special operations teams through mountain passes, and do it quieter than anything China or Russia could field. Sterling's future depended on rotor blades spinning at exactly 1,900 revolutions per minute under load. The problem was, they wouldn't. Chief Financial Officer Damon Cross knew why. He stood beside the open engine cowling in a suit worth more than Elias made in 3 months, gray eyes watching rain beat against carbon fiber plating. 3 weeks earlier, he had approved firmware modifications to Aurora X's flight computer without informing engineering. On paper, they improved fuel efficiency by 17%. In reality, they masked a flaw in the turbine governor, one capable of ripping the rotor assembly apart mid-flight. But if the demonstration succeeded tomorrow, if the Pentagon signed the contract, the fixes could be quietly rolled into maintenance cycles later. Nobody needed to know. That was a plan Damon had sold Adelaide over scotch while Elias emptied her office trash unnoticed. Oil pressure nominal. Chief Engineer Finn Holloway reported now, tapping his tablet. Governor response curve is textbook. Then why did it surge during spool up? Adelaide asked coldly. Finn hesitated. Damon stepped forward smoothly. They're coming to see performance in adverse conditions. This is adverse. We hover 60 seconds. Prove the point. We're done. You want to cancel tomorrow's demo because of the vibration you felt? He added quietly. Adelaide looked out over Seattle. 40 million lights blurred by rain. Each one a future, depending on what happened tonight. 60 seconds, she said at last. Hover only. Damon smiled. That was when Elias heard it. The turbine wasn't singing. It was stuttering. 19 cycles per second. A resonance most people would feel before hearing. A frequency that crawled through muscle and bone. It was the sound of a bypass valve feeding pressure away from the governor. The sound of an engine about to grenade itself. He abandoned his cart and walked toward the helicopter. Security stepped in front of him. Pads closed. The engine's wrong. Engineers checked it. The engine's wrong. Adelaide's voice snapped through the storm. What's your problem? She stared at him the way people stare at furniture that suddenly speaks. Elias met her eyes. The turbine's running a 19 hertz resonance cycle, he said calmly. Your bypass valve is installed backward. If you spool to full power, the governor will lose hydraulic authority, and the rotor assembly will overspeed. Silence. Then Adelaide laughed. You're a janitor. Yes. And you're telling me my $50 million aircraft has a valve installed backward? Yes. Do you have any idea how many engineers designed this helicopter? 247, Elias said quietly. I used to be one of them. Rain felt colder suddenly. You work for Falcon Industries, Adelaide realized slowly. 12 years ago. X-Rotor Division. Damon's expression shifted. Recognition. Fear. Falcon had gone bankrupt after a prototype crash. 3 people dead. And Elias Grant had been the chief engineer blamed for it. Fix this, Adelaide said finally, her smile sharp as broken glass, and I'll pay you $100 million. But if you're wrong, I'll have you arrested for sabotage. Do we understand each other? Elias nodded. I'll need tools, and someone to shut down fuel flow. Finn moved automatically. Adelaide didn't look away from Elias. Work fast. Elias dropped beneath the helicopter's belly into fuel-soaked darkness. The turbine compartment opened like a steel flower, hydraulic lines branching like arteries. And there it was, the bypass valve, installed backward, a shortcut that worked on paper, and killed people in practice. His hands moved with muscle memory he'd spent 13 years trying to forget. Disconnect pressure lines, rotate housing, reconnect sequence. 90 seconds. He slid back out. Try it now. Finn ran diagnostics. The turbine spooled smoothly. The 19 hertz stutter vanished. Aurora X sounded like it was breathing instead of choking. Adelaide turned slowly toward Damon. We'll discuss this later, she said, voice cold enough to frost steel. Then she looked back at Elias for the first time not as a janitor, but as a person. What's your name? Elias Grant. You saved lives tonight. He didn't answer. Adelaide Monroe didn't sleep that night. The next 17 hours burned like a fuse running towards something that could either save Sterling Aerotech or destroy it. Constance Vale transformed the main conference room into a command center before midnight. 3 independent aviation safety consultants were flown in on red eyes from California, Virginia, and Texas. Finn Holloway and his engineering team stripped Aurora X down to bolts and bundled wiring, photographing every component and tracing modification histories through months of change requests and buried approvals. Vanessa Hale drafted 3 press releases simultaneously, one for success, one for delay, and one that began with the word regrettably. Adelaide sat at the center of it all, nursing coffee that had gone cold twice, watching schematics bloom across massive displays as consultants marked discrepancies in red digital ink. Aurora X had almost killed someone. Now they needed to know why. Elias went home. He wasn't asked to stay. He didn't offer. When he stepped into a small apartment in Renton just past midnight, Rosie was still awake at the kitchen table surrounded by colored pencils. She had drawn a helicopter. But this one had something new, a heart inside its chest. Beneath it, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "Machines that breathe need people who listen." Elias stared at it. "How did you know?" he asked softly. "You hum when you're worried," Rosie replied. "You've been humming the helicopter song for 3 weeks. The one that goes n, she added, imitating a turbine cycling. "But tonight you weren't humming, so you fixed it." He sat beside her. "I tried to." "Did you tell them about the 19 hertz thing?" He blinked. "How do you know about that?" Rosie held up another drawing. Wavy lines labeled 19 hertz and little stick figures shaking. "You told me engines have heartbeats. Heartbeats have rhythms. When rhythms are wrong, the machine gets sick." He pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Before dawn, the audit team had an answer. Finn presented it using Aurora X's actual flight computer, wired into a diagnostic display the size of a movie screen. "Someone modified the flight firmware 6 weeks ago," he explained, highlighting blocks of code. "They created a virtual sensor layer that reports false data to diagnostics. When you run standard checks, everything looks perfect, because the software is lying to itself." "Why?" Adelaide asked quietly. "To hide efficiency losses," Finn said. "Aurora X had been underperforming fuel consumption by 11% instead of redesigning the fuel manifold. An expensive fix. Someone masked the problem with software. Fake efficiency numbers made the aircraft competitive on paper. But in real flight, it would have failed performance specs in front of the Pentagon. Who authorized it?" Adelaide asked. Finn pulled up the change request. Damon Cross. Submitted. Approved. Implemented. Silence fell like snowfall. "The reverse bypass valve?" Constance asked. "A field modification," Finn replied. "Probably installed to compensate for pressure issues the fake firmware was hiding. A Band-Aid on a bullet wound. If we'd flown yesterday." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Adelaide stood at the window. Her reflection stared back, and for a moment she saw her father standing there 13 years ago, telling her the most important thing he ever had: build things that deserve to fly, not things that deserve to sell. She turned to Elias. "The Falcon X rotor crash," she said. "What really happened?" He met her eyes. "Someone modified the fuel system to save weight," he said. "Filed the paperwork under my approval code while I was on vacation. The prototype flew 3 times successfully. The 4th flight pushed hard. Fuel starvation caused engine failure at altitude. The helicopter auto-rotated into a mountainside. 3 people died." "And the signature?" Elias hesitated. Damon Cross was Falcon CFO. Vanessa made a small sound. "Oh, God." Constance reached for her phone. "I'm calling the FAA and the FBI." "Wait," Adelaide said. "If we call now, Aurora X gets grounded pending investigation. The Pentagon cancels the evaluation. Sterling loses the contract. Our stock collapses, and 3,000 people lose their jobs before Christmas." "If we don't call," Constance replied, "we're complicit in fraud." Adelaide took a breath. "We're going to demonstrate Aurora X today." Vanessa stared at her. "That's insane." "That's integrity," Adelaide replied. "We fly with Elias Grant's corrections installed. Then we hand the Pentagon a full report of what we found, who did it, and how we fixed it. If we lose the contract, at least we lose it honestly." She turned to Elias. "Will you fly with me?" By 1300 hours, Damon Cross had vanished. Security found his office wiped clean. Hard drive removed. Company Mercedes abandoned at SeaTac long-term parking. The FBI began drafting warrants. But first, the helicopter had to fly. At 1,400 hours exactly, Aurora X lifted from Sterling Towers helipad. Adelaide at the controls. Elias in the co-pilot seat. Colonel Patterson of the Pentagon's evaluation team standing behind them with independent instrumentation. Hover. Forward flight. Banking turns. Rapid altitude changes. Simulated assault approach. Emergency power descent. Every maneuver designed to break the aircraft. Aurora X responded like it was born to fly. The turbine sang at exactly 2,300 revolutions per minute. Rotor tracking was perfect. Fuel consumption matched projections. Because now, it was honestly built. At one point during a hard banking turn pushing 3GS, Elias watched the vibration readout remain rock steady. No 19 Hz stutter. No resonance cascade. The machine was breathing. 40 minutes later, Adelaide set Aurora X down so gently the skids kissed concrete. Colonel Patterson finished his notes. "That's the best helicopter I've flown in 20 years, he said. "But we're not awarding the contract today. We'll verify your audit independently. If everything checks out, you'll hear from us in 30 days. 3 weeks later, Damon Cross was arrested trying to board a flight to Singapore. Investigators tied him to technical fraud at 5 aerospace firms across 15 years. Sterling stock dropped 11%, then recovered when the Pentagon awarded the contract anyway. Elias Grant became Director of Flight Safety Engineering on a Monday morning in December. His first act, creating the Rosie Grant STEM Fund, a scholarship program for children of aircraft maintenance workers. His second, rewriting Sterling's safety protocols to include anonymous reporting channels and independent verification requirements. His third was simpler. He took Rosie to Sterling Tower on a quiet Saturday morning. They rode the elevator to the 80th floor. Aurora X rested beneath protective cover on the helipad. Rosie walked slowly around it, one small hand trailing along the fuselage. Then she looked up at the rotor hub and smiled. "It looks happy," she said. "It's a machine," Elias replied. "It doesn't have feelings. But we do. And when we build things right, the things feel right." She took his hand. "Are you happy now, Dad?" Elias watched the sunrise break over the Cascades. He thought about the box in his closet, about the friend he'd lost, about Adelaide choosing truth over profit, about second chances. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I am." Rosie squeezed his hand. "Good," she said, "because machines that breathe need people who listen.